In this time of so many things happening so quickly on our planet, there's a feeling you may have as an individual, as a citizen of Earth, that things are so rapidly changing and not necessarily for the good that it can feel overwhelming. It can feel sometimes without hope. So we're going to address that experience of overwhelm as we go along. And I'd like to begin with just a few statements. We have where I live in the United States, the often unaddressed and unspoken reality that Europeans came to this place we call North America and displaced and destroyed the culture and the peoples that lived here. So here in Southern California, what we call this area of what is now, excuse me, the United States, we have a history for thousands and thousands of years of the Chumash and the Tongva being the stewards of this land. And so I want to honor the indigenous peoples who have unfortunately been displaced and their culture attacked and their peoples killed by European settlers. And at the same time, while we recognize that, we all have a cultural context in which we live. So here at the Mindsight Institute, what we urge is that each of us realize that we come with implicit biases. So if anything I say or do in the course of our communication today makes you feel unheard or unseen or disrespected in any way, please reach out to us at the Mindsight Institute at info@mindsightinstitute.com and just let us know so we can open the lines of communication. Since we all have implicit biases, if we do something or say something, we want to make sure that we're receiving communication in both ways so we can correct the errors, learn from the experience, and reconnect if there's been a disconnection. Now, as we go forward, when we think about the cultural context in which we grow up in, whether it's the lands that you live in or the identity that you experience, both internally generated and also shaped by culture, we want to really look deeply at the science of what that identity is made of. And that can involve many aspects of what we can simply call the mind. So the mind is a word that if you're working in anything related to mental health, this is what you do every day of your working life, is you're working with the health of the mind. So we begin by just saying that in the various fields of mental health, the disciplines that include social work and educational therapy, occupational therapy, art therapy, music therapy, nursing, psychology, psychiatry, all of these fields, what's fascinating to start with is that we often don't realize this. In my own training in psychiatry and as a psychology researcher, we don't realize that we don't have a definition of that word mind. So let's pause for a moment and think about in your own training, in whatever discipline you're in, whether it's in mental health or coaching or education, or what were you offered as a definition of the mind? And I don't mean a description of emotions and thoughts and memories and attention and stuff like that. I mean a definition. And if you were given a definition, please write it in so we can see what the different definitions might be. And if you were not offered a definition, you could just write the word no. And I would write the word, which I'll do right now. I would just write the word no, because I was given no definition of the mind. And let's just see what passes by on the chat just to get a conversation going. And you can see that it's virtually, well, not even virtually, it's everyone is saying no. Yeah, and it's strange, whatever our background. So we're not alone. We're together on this, that we're in a field called mental health, and yet no one ever told us what the mental was. Now, we can do the same thing about mental health. There may be many descriptions, but the problem with that is if it's the health of the mental, the health of the mind, and we weren't told what the mind is, we really can't say what a healthy mind is. So Yes, if you've, I should always say not if you've trained with me, because what we do is we offer a definition of the mind for this field called interpersonal neurobiology. And it's just basically a term meaning, what if you tried to look outside the box of how things usually are and brought everything together? And when you do that, you come up with a view of what the mind might be. And from over 30 years ago now, that definition of the mind, which I'll explore in a moment, lets you actually say not only what the mind is, but you can start saying then from that definition of the mind, what a healthy mind might be. And we're going to briefly look at that so we can look at what the idea of a self is, what the idea of identity might be related to the mind and the mind's experience of health, and then look at something related to that, which is belonging. And so the great turning, we really want to begin with the mind, because if we're going to turn our lives in a positive direction, like Joanna Macy urges us to do, and Joanna is just about, she's a dear friend of mine, she's just about to turn 94. So she's been working in this area for over 50 years. And it would be a wonderful, wonderful thing to be able to tell her on her 94th birthday, you know, we at least have a conceptual framework. So we're going to adjust this lens, yes, through which we see our experience and see what that lens actually is. So the mind, of course, you know, has at least 4 facets. It has something you're very aware of, and let's just name it. Its subjective experience is one facet of the mind. And what that means is the felt sense of something. You then have the ability to know that felt sense with something called consciousness. And then you also have something called information processing, which means I can say to you a word like the great turning, and we can use the air vibrations, the energy of sound, to symbolize something, and that's called information processing. So these are the first 3 facets of mind. And, you know, you could say, well, what are they really? And we're going to make a proposal that what they may be, this is just a hypothesis, is an emergent aspect of something called energy flow. Now, what this phrase comes from is a very systems-based thing. So in complex systems, what you see is the idea that complex systems have this thing called emergence, which is something is arising from the fundamental ways in which the aspects or parts or processes of a system that's called a complex system interact with each other. So it's like the wetness of water. No single water molecule is wet, but you get wetness from the interaction of the single elements of this system of water. And when a system is open to influences from outside of itself, and think about your own life, would you say that stuff outside of what you would call you impacts you? And if that's true, then you're an open system. The second feature of a complex system is if you're capable of being chaotic. And this would be an example of things being roughly random or very difficult, if not actually impossible to predict. So if you're chaos capable and open, those are 2 features. And the third feature is nonlinear. So you're open, you're chaos capable, and you're nonlinear, which means you are having the processes where a small input in the beginning leads to a relatively large result that's very difficult to predict. That's what nonlinear means. So in our universe, if you're open, chaos capable, nonlinear, you are a part of, at least, or you are a complex system. And let's see how many of you would say, yes, these 3 aspects, being open, chaos capable, nonlinear, kind of describe your life. And if they do, just type in yes. And if they don't, just type in no. And let's just see. Just so we can add everyone in the discussion. You can see all the yeses. And this is a fascinating thing, you know, that for most of us, it's a yes. And what's interesting about this is what that means is that you are a part of, or you are fundamentally a complex system. So chaos capable means you can have a very, chaotic day where you can't control or predict what's happening. It's just, it's not exactly the same as randomness, but a lot of stuff happens that you couldn't have planned for and or organized. It's like having a disorganized day, that kind of thing. So here's the thing about complex systems. They have emergent properties. And one of the emergent properties of complex systems is it's called self-organization. And here's the amazing thing about self-organization, and this is now the fourth facet of mind. We're going to propose that the mind, this fourth facet of mind, is beyond subjective experience, beyond consciousness, beyond information processing. This self-organizing view says that the mind is an embodied and relational. So we're saying it's not just up in your brain, in your head, but it's fully embodied. It's an embodied and relational, and it's an emergent, which is a part of complex system. Which kind of emergent property? It's self-organizing. I'm going to type this whole thing out for you. Process that regulates the flow of energy and information. So this is a definition of the mind offered back in 1992 to a group of scientists, and everyone, didn't have a definition of the mind, but with this definition of at least the fourth facet of the mind, you can then say from that definition what a healthy mind might be, because what complex system science tells us, the mathematics of that, is that you basically have a river where one side of the river is like chaos. One side is, the flow of the river would be more like harmony, and the experience on the other bank of the river is rigidity. And this is straight out of the math of complex systems. And when I saw that in a math book, I thought that really describes mental life, that when we're healthy, we're in harmony. And when you have any symptom of a disorder, you're either chaotic or rigid. So this was quite exciting here in this very moment to share this with you, because what this allowed was to say a healthy mind is a mind that optimizes self-organization. And then you could say, well, how in the world does that happen? And the way that happens is by differentiating on the one hand and linking on the other. And that process doesn't have a name, so we're going to name it integration. And that's how you create optimal self-organization.